There's three components of that report that you have in front of you. One of is the online survey. That was one of the approaches that we undertook to try to gather information. It was posted on the Grand Rapids Public Schools website. The other is we did 5 large group community meetings, which we'll get into and share a little bit about. And then the third is the small group individual stakeholder meetings. So the first is the online survey. That is, I'm working backwards. Tab 3 of your report. So this starts at about page 17. And I just want to gather some information from there, from the online survey. Again, this portion of the report was written by, compiled by Sunil Joy. Sunil is a data analyst for Kent ISD who does exceptional work and quality work, so I want to give him all the credit as far as the online survey is concerned. And again, the cooperation, I want to thank John's office for his assistant and his staff to work with us as far as the technology, getting this posted on your site and so forth. But so I'm working off of tab 3 here. There is a separate booklet that you have. I want to make note of that. You don't have to pull that out now, but for later reading, if you haven't had the opportunity to dig into that, that is entirely focused on the survey. And it is about 140 pages or so. And the reason for that is that survey is disaggregated by respondent group. So there's a portion in there, for example, for staff. There's a portion in there, how did they respond to the survey? There's a portion in there for community members. How did they respond to the survey? There's a portion in there for parents, grandparents, guardians. How did they respond to the survey? So you're able to dig in there by different groups to take a look how each group responded to those questions. If you haven't done it, there's, I think, 382 narrative responses that are, I think, under tab 5 of that survey booklet. If you want to know what your community is thinking, that's the open-ended question that was on. It was there was one question on the survey. Of what information they wanted to share with the board, and 382 individuals took the opportunity to provide you some specific feedback, and there's about 40 pages of that in there. And so for your reading pleasure, you can take that home and delve into that and dig into that for more information. So again, what's in the going back to that other booklet I was just talking to you, the main booklet that I'm talking about now, that's the composite. That's the aggregate. That's sort of the results of all those different individuals different groups who completed the survey, and starting on page 17. So, again, there were 621 individuals who responded to the survey. I think that's an excellent response from the community, especially the fact that this wasn't up, maybe about 3 weeks or so. And I also want to emphasize this is not scientific. You know, if we were doing a scientific survey process, it would have been stratified. There would have been a lot of protocols that would have been followed. So this was open-ended. I guess if someone really wanted to go on there and submit it 47 times, they probably could have if they really wanted to do that to skew the results. I don't suspect that we had any of those activities taking place just based on the disperse, how the different groups that responded. But there were 621 responses. Of that, I'm on page 22. Parents, guardians, grandparents were the largest group of respondents. There were 35% of those of the 621 were within this category. There were 28% that were employees of the Grand Rapids Public Schools, and there was 21% who were community members at large with the survey. Page 27. Top 3 skills in terms of what those who responded to the survey, what are they looking for in the next superintendent? They want a superintendent who is visible and accessible. 341 individuals said that was one of their top priorities or top skills, someone who had the ability to get out there and get into the buildings, be visible, be approachable, be accessible. That was followed by their ability to lead a team. 308 respondents said that was a very important skill set, is to manage and to lead a strong team, followed by knowledge and experience with teaching and learning. don't have my glasses on, I think it's about 280 respondents submitted that. This was a really telling question right here, and I'm glad that it was asked, because what it's asking for is balance. How important, from a community's perspective, is it to have the next superintendent have familiarity with the Grand Rapids Public Schools and with our community compared to someone who may not be familiar with our community but might have some fresh and new ideas? Now that doesn't mean if someone is familiar with Grand Rapids that they won't have fresh and familiar, their own ideas, but just it's the old, someone from our community versus someone from outside of our community, and the mean on this was 6.45 on a 10-point scale, meaning that the community is leaning towards, it's important to get someone who's familiar with Grand Rapids Public Schools. Now that's not a slam dunk, but it's a lean towards that. And if you even break that question down in terms of the mode, the most frequent responses, 97 people put an 8 on that 10-point scale, followed by 84 people who put a 10, meaning that for them that was at the end of the continuum. It was extremely important to find somebody who was familiar with the community. And then between 5, 6, and 7 on that rating, there were between 80 and 82 people within each of those rating categories, 5, 6, and 7, sort of in the middle on that question. We asked the question, what's the biggest challenge confronting the Grand Rapids Public Schools? Or what's our biggest opportunity confronting Grand Rapids Public Schools? And the biggest challenge was by far recruitment and retention of staff, particularly diverse staff, was recognized as a very important challenge confronting the Grand Rapids Public Schools, which, by the way, is consistent with those other two components, with the community meetings as well as the stakeholder meetings that we had. That one really presented itself by all groups as a pressing challenge. The next question. Again, this is on that 10-point scale, and we're kind of asking it a little bit differently. How important is it that Grand Rapids Public Schools stay the course with the initiatives that you've launched, the transformation plan, and all the great things that have been happening within Grand Rapids Public Schools? How important is it that we stay the course, or should we alter course? When you bring in a new superintendent, sometimes you bring in a new vision, a new plan, if you will. And overall, the respondents, the mean was 6.37, meaning that the community leans towards, as far as the online survey goes, stay the course. We're heading down the right path. We need to keep this initiative going, keep executing the existing plan. And again, if you break this down by mode, 94 of the respondents, most of the respondents responded with an 8 on this, followed by 86 who put it as a 10, 82 who had it as a 7, and then unlike the other survey, there was in the 40s between 2, 3, and 4, 40 respondents about each one of those. And again, that's page 31 if you're following along on this report. So that's just a quick snapshot of the survey. You can go in and delve deeper on your own, and again, there's a whole separate book dedicated towards the survey itself with the narratives, the open-ended questions, as well as how each subgroup responded to the survey. But there was a second component, which were these community meetings. We had 5, as the board is aware, we had 5 community gatherings, widely publicized. And I'm working off of tab 2 now of your report, so I'm working backwards. And also tab 4. So if you take a look at tab 4 is sort of the raw data. It's the artifacts of those meetings. It's the raw notes that came from those community meetings. That's what's in the appendix of tab 4. But tab 2 sort of is just a quick summary. And again, under this one, Eureka People and Mary Green, I want to give them a shout out. They did exceptional work of the Eureka group. We asked them to help us facilitate these meetings. They did a wonderful job, and they are the authors of this section of the report. So I don't want to claim credit for their good work. 5 sessions. Again, we had one of those sessions was at Union High School, Cesar Chavez, the Ford Academic Center. City High School, City Middle, and then Sibley were the location of those 5 meetings. If you take a look at page 13 of the report, page 13 gives you an idea in terms of, we had about 100 people overall from the community who attended those over those 5 sessions, a little under 100 people combined. That doesn't include staff, doesn't include Ken ISD staff who were there taking the notes. That's GRPS community members. And they were evenly split. About half had parents in the schools, and about half did not. If you take a look at page 13. And in terms of what they said was important and a priority, a track record of student achievement. And that again is another theme of someone who comes in as superintendent who really has a priority of academic achievement and has a track record. Can demonstrate in their career that they've shown results. Page 14, what skills? So what are the important skills? Again, culturally competent, bilingual, collaborative. You'll see those again and again. Those showed up, those were heard during the community gatherings, these 5 community gatherings, but certainly loud and clear here. Supports teachers, builds bridges. Again, that whole notion of partnership was extremely important from a community's perspective. In terms of qualities, integrity, honesty, consistent across equity across schools and across the community. Now this is important, maybe an important point to pause because it's a theme that occurred again and again in our dialogue, both with stakeholder groups as well as here at these community meetings. And if you read the narrative and some of the comments that are in the survey, is a perception of equity between the theme schools and the neighborhood schools. I don't know the facts. I don't have the data. You have access to the data. I don't know if it's perception or reality, but as the expression goes, perception becomes reality, is a concern that there's inequity between theme schools and between the neighborhood schools. And even if there isn't inequity, perception that the theme schools might get more of the spotlight and more of the attention. And that's concerning to your stakeholders. And I'm sure if you've heard it, it may be concerning to you as well. So, but that is one of the qualities there, is that they're equity driven. So, in terms of advice from these 5 community meetings that we had, what advice does the community have for you who showed up? Again, academic excellence was huge. Innovation is great, but we need to improve equity. Student achievement for all kids was a priority. And again, this is off of page 14, and it's a repeated theme of some things you've already heard. Last but not least, the first tab. This is the stakeholder meeting. So these were the meetings that Ron Kaler and I participated in. This was authored by Ron and I. If there's anything that is proper English and eloquent, Ron Kaler wrote it. Anything where you see, misspelled words, incomplete sentences, past tense, when I should be using present tense, I have to own that. That's how you'll be able to discern who wrote what in that portion of the report. But this is tab 1. Again, we had over 30 of these separate small group individual meetings. Some of these were as large. They had over 50 individuals. For example, we met with the administrative team, and I don't know how many individuals were on the administrative team, but it filled up the basement downstairs. So, some of them were to this facility here. So some were as large as that. Others were as small as 1-on-1 or 2-on-2. Most of the group sizes were probably hovering in around the range of 4 to 6 individuals that Ron and I met with. And again, this is both internal and external stakeholders. And again, you told us, we didn't go out and pick who we were going to go talk to. This is from your feedback of who it was that you wanted us to go out. Who are your partners out there in the community? And you identified these groups, and we worked as hard as we could to get to as many of them as we could, but candidly, we did not get to them all in the amount of time that we had. but we tried. But there were many that we did not get to. I just want to be upfront with that. So the scope, again, this is on page 2 and 3. We had 4 questions. We asked each of these group 4 questions, and the same 4 questions, maybe posed in a different way, that were asked at these 5 community meetings. But what are the strengths of the Grand Rapids Public Schools? What are you doing exceptionally well? What are you proud of? That you want the new superintendent to continue that work. Don't mess it up. You know, when you come in here, that's important to us that we keep down this path. Likewise, what are the greatest challenges that are confronting the Grand Rapids Public Schools, or opportunities? You know, no matter how good a school system is, a school system can always get better. Any organization, no matter how good they are, they can always get better. It's about continuous improvement. So what are those challenges was the second question. And the third is, what are the characteristics from your stakeholders' perspective? What is it, you know, when they're asked, what do you want to see in the next superintendent? What kind of feedback do we get? And then what advice do you have for the board? And so for purpose of this presentation, I believe on page 2 and 3 it gets into those, what the stakeholders had to say in terms of strengths as well as your challenges. But let me just try to summarize it all for you. So if we were developing the profile, if we were developing the brochure for your next superintendent, what would those characteristics be? In this portion, I have to apologize because I'm probably going to read a little bit. But this is where the patterns and the themes, these are things that came up again and again, not just with your stakeholder group meetings, but also in the survey and also in the 5 large group community meetings. Here are the characteristics that matter to your stakeholders. They want a results-oriented superintendent. And I'm just going to give you some quotes here. We need a school leader with a track record of moving an urban school district with similar challenges to higher performance levels. We don't want just someone who can design a plan. We want someone who's a doer. We want someone who can execute that plan and make it happen. Strong cultural competency was a huge characteristic again and again that came up with each group. Diversity is this district's greatest strength, one of its greatest strengths. But it also presents with it some challenges. And so we need a leader here who is culturally competent. A team leader. I love this quote from one of your stakeholders, community leader. The new superintendent doesn't have to be Superman or Superwoman. They must know how to lead a team. You know, that was huge. They must be able to recognize talent and then give that talent the opportunity to go out and do their work. We want a team of doers who make things happen. Equity focused. That one was huge. One of the teachers that we met with, I think, summed this up, but it was said again and again. We want a superintendent with an equity mindset. And that was voiced repeatedly. Collaborator, a partner, was just a huge, a willing partner. A superintendent who has a skill set to build alliances and partnerships. And Ron and I had the opportunity throughout this process to meet many of your willing partners out there. A visible, personable, approachable, relatable, humble superintendent. They want someone they can relate to. Whether you're, wherever you are in this organization, if you work for the organization or out there in the community, someone that you can talk to, someone who is easily approached and that they can relate with and relate to. Skilled communicator. And with this is an effective listener. And they went a step further, an authentic communicator. One of the things that they love about your current superintendent is the unvarnished truth and absolute frankness. When this district faces a challenge, put it out there. Don't try to hide it, confront it. A 10th grade student at C.A. Frost, I think, said it well. We don't need a superintendent who sugarcoats things. Tell it like it is. You know, so that characteristic is highly valued. A visionary was an important characteristic. A strong sense of direction of where they want to take the district. But with that, particularly with your partners, and I'm talking about foundations, I'm talking about organizations out there, this one came up certainly a few times. Your partners want to know where they fit within that vision. They understand that they have a role to play, but where do they fit? What's their piece? And how does it fit within the overall puzzle of what they're being asked to do? And a strong sense of direction that comes from the district. This is what we need you to do. This is what we're asking you to do. Whether that foundation or that philanthropic cause decides to take that up is up to them, but they want to know where they fit in that overall vision. Transparency was huge. Again, don't be afraid to admit flaws. There is a little bit of a sense in those comments that you read that sometimes when the district faces criticism, and this is true for all organizations, this is true for Kent ISD, the human tendency is to circle the wagons and to get defensive. Don't be. You know, they want a superintendent who just acknowledges it for what it is, takes the criticism, and uses it as a tool to get better. But don't be afraid to admit those flaws. Knowledgeable. Someone who's aware of the best practices happening out there in the field of education. In particular, special education came up quite a bit, both within the community meetings as well as some of the stakeholder meetings. Political savvy. Someone who understands the local political landscape, and how to navigate that minefield a little bit here within the community, but also at the state level. This is the largest district within this region. And so we're asking, or the stakeholders are saying that there's an expectation and an understanding that they have to be a player at the state level. A preferred credential is someone who's bilingual, who can communicate in more than one language, or at the very least has it as a priority at all levels within the organization to increase the capacity of staff to communicate bilingual with your population. Preferred credential is teaching experience, someone who's been in the classroom, understands what's being asked of teachers. Self-confidence, you know, this is not arrogance. Obviously, you know, because if you go too far in self-confidence, then it gets to arrogance. But what they're asking for is really is assurance that they know that they're heading in the right path and they're not threatened by challenges that are out there because they believe in what they're doing and that this is the right thing. And they have the ability to instill that belief within others. And this last comment is aspirational. I'm going to give credit. You know, I try to protect anonymity of some of these quotes. That's why there's not names, because, you know, our promise to these stakeholders is that we're not going to throw you under the bus. But this is a positive one. I'm going to give the credit to this one. This is Joe Jones, who made this statement. And all of you, I think, know Joe, city commissioner, but also with the Urban League. He summed it up beautifully. He said, "We want an aspirational leader, not for personal gain, but for the district. Grand Rapids Public Schools has all the ingredients to be a model urban district, not just for Michigan, but for the nation. And there's no reason that it can't happen here." So have a leader who is aspirational. So what does all this mean? You know, here's the bottom line, and I'm gonna go off of page 6. What's the path forward? Yeah. This is. Oh, because I misspelled it already. I put this one. Forgive my lack of W there. The path. That's tentatively going. Yeah, tentatively going forward. So what does all this mean? You know, and I want to be clear, Kent ISD's role is not to tell you the path to go down or what have you, but at least to try to present to you some options. And these were options that came up in actually talking with stakeholders. And so I'm working off of page 6 in particular in your report. It's not clear what your community is telling you. Let's start there. The survey says they lean towards familiarity. They lean towards, the next superintendent staying the course. But it's not a slam dunk. Now, some individuals it is. It's very, that we talk to the stakeholders, it's very clear that as a board you should look internal. But with other stakeholders, it's clearly the opposite. Is that you clearly need to bring in someone from the outside. So let's just talk about some of the pros and cons of each of these. So for the internal, here's sort of the comments that we heard. The next superintendent should come from the community. It should be someone familiar with Grand Rapids Public Schools and the journey that we've been on. We need continuity and stability. One stakeholder said, a community leader said, let's stay on the success path we're on. The quality of the person is the key, not where they're from or what district they're from. A next comment that summed it up, Grand Rapids is highly relational. If we bring in a new superintendent, it's going to take a long time for that new superintendent to figure out and understand the networks of the different groups that are out there, to understand that landscape. We need a superintendent who embraces the existing vision. As this leader said, it would be one thing if this district were in a state of chaos or in a very bad place, but this district is heading down the right path. Some good things are happening, so let's stay the course. And then last, this was a repeated theme, the value of going with the known versus the concern of going with an unknown. There's been historically occasions that were cited when the district went outside in the past for a superintendent, and the fear is that we would possibly take a step back if the board chooses that path here at this juncture. There are others who feel very clearly that you need to go outside. As one stakeholder group said, just look at the data, particularly from a racial and ethnic lens. There are performance issues. If we want change in the educational outcomes, we need someone from outside the system who can bring in new strategies to change those outcomes. There was others who just said a fresh perspective is healthy. And there was another that really looked at this of the gravity of this, that we have the opportunity to impact an entire generation with this decision. This next superintendent, if they're here a while, impacts an entire generation. And given that responsibility that the board owes it to the community to do its due diligence and to ensure a very thorough search process to make sure that the right person gets the job, whoever that is. This next one here, it's really doesn't happen a lot within the school community, just to be clear. You will hear some cases where it happens, but it's more from the corporate world. And the mindset from some of these stakeholders, when Jim Hackett got appointed to Ford Motor Company CEO, they didn't just do an open posting and see if he would apply. They went after him because he had the right skill set. And so the thought is, with a targeted search, identify the one or two people who has all of those right characteristics and go after him or her. Don't leave it to chance that they're going to apply. Now, the downside with this approach, if you've met with MASB, they've probably talked to you a little bit about it, is that it's a lot of it happens behind the scenes, because you're going to be going to someone who's probably a sitting superintendent who isn't looking to leave their district. And you're going to try to entice that individual to say, come and work for Grand Rapids Public Schools. And the natural reaction of that individual says, well, maybe I'm pretty happy doing what I'm doing here and where I'm at right now. My family's situated. If I go after this, I don't want to go after it if there's 5 or 6 other candidates going after the position as well. What assurance, am I going to get that if I go after this, I'll get the job? Because I have a lot to lose if I go after this and I, publicly, because in Michigan under the Open Meetings Act, all of this happens publicly, and I understand there will be an interview, but if I do the interview right, I need assurance that I'll get the job. But that's a targeted model. It's sort of out of the corporate world. You go out, when they go out and find a CEO, they don't, it's not like by open invitation. They go out and they find the individual who they're looking for. But nevertheless, that is an option. There are others who see a third path, which is a blend. It's the best of both worlds. We're going to do an open search, but we're going to invite internal candidates who are qualified to apply for the job. Now, it's the same risk because you get sometimes sitting superintendents under this scenario because in Michigan under the Open Meetings Act, all the interviews happen in public. Candidates, once the board determines who you're going to interview, that becomes public information. And a sitting superintendent, it all works great if they end up getting the job. If they end up not getting the job, they have to go back to their communities and say, hey, I really do want to be here. I didn't want to leave. And it's hard to sell that sometimes. And likewise to their boards, and to their staff, et cetera. There's a lot of risk for sitting superintendents. So not all the time. Sometimes you'll get a lot of sitting superintendents. This will be a desirable job, but you tend to get a lot of assistant superintendents or deputies, et cetera, that under this scenario that may apply. They'll ask two questions. And some of you have heard me say this. Typically, as a candidate, as a superintendent, if I'm a sitting superintendent, how's the board? Is the board stable? Are they in a good place to work with? And the second question that an external candidate will ask is there a viable internal candidate going after the job? Because if there's a viable internal candidate going after the job, they really, really have to think through it. In other words, the perception is this cooked? Is this already a wired deal? Am I just, window dressing? You're going to bring me in just to say that you did a search? You can mean it very sincerely. You'll stand on your head. You'll say it 47 times. Your search consultant will say it 47 times. No, this truly is an open process. We want the best superintendent. But if there's a viable internal candidate, they get a little squeamish. That's just human nature. The other side of this, yeah, let's do that open search because if the internal candidate goes after it, or internal candidates go after it and they get the job, there's a sense of confidence that comes with that they really earned the seat, that they won this job, that the board wanted them, and that they put themselves through the paces and prevailed. The concern or question mark there is if an internal candidate does eventually prevail, do they have the ability to look beyond personal loyalties in naming his or her team? That's one of those concerns. So I'll turn it to my colleague, Mr. Kaler, who will close it up here, and then any questions that you might have.
Thanks again for the opportunity. As Ron said, we got a lot out of it, and really what we got out of it was a lot of hope for our community, a lot of demonstration of huge commitment from our community for our children and for our schools. I've said many times in my years in education that one of the real challenges that we've created in our state through our market-based reforms in our schools with schools of choice and with charters is that it isn't the loss of the per pupil foundation grant that's the most harmful thing you lose when somebody chooses another school. It's the loss of a motivated parent or parents. It's the loss of high expectations for their child and for their school district, for their building in which their child attends. And that has left many of our urban areas bereft of support. Without the deep support that we saw here when we met with community residents of all sorts. I mean, we met with people who write seven-figure checks, and we met with many people who have seven-figure dreams. And what we learned is that all are deeply committed to the best Grand Rapids public schools they can have. We found that they have support for the board. They have great support and admiration for the current superintendent. We found that where there were concerns about the type of leadership we have or want to have, it's because they're looking to the absolute needs of their children and where they see this community going in future years. But so too did we see from those who said, and you saw the numbers, the respondents, and a lot of the conversations we had, that no, we feel like we're headed on a good path. Those people were expressing the concerns that they felt when the district truly was in something of a trough. When the district was in a place where, there needed to be a change. And this superintendent brought some strong changes. Past bond issues, transformation plan, an enhancement millage that Grand Rapids Public Schools played a huge part in passing, demonstrating the support that this community has for its schools, but contributing to the support for all schools. And so nobody wants to take a step backwards. And so some felt the fear that previous searches didn't bring us the type of leadership that we hope for and need. Doesn't mean that they didn't want the best. They're willing to do whatever. And their advice to the board was, make sure you have the right candidate. Don't settle. Don't worry about a timeline as much as you worry about the children in our community and their needs and how we can fulfill them. I think they also expressed confidence in you to be able to make the right decision. And all said, the interesting thing about this district was that there are so many groups who said, give us a clear idea of where you're going and how we can plug into that. We need a collaborative and cooperative leader because we want to help you. We want to roll up our sleeves and join you in this work. It wasn't a, hey, good luck with that. It was a, hey, how can we help? And give us a better idea of how we can help, and we're there with you. And we'll help you every step of the way. Obviously, all factions of our community want to be represented and want to have aspirational leadership for their children so that their children sees their future in the role models in the classrooms and in central office. And that's a challenge for all of our school districts. That's a challenge that all of us in education need to roll up our sleeves and do a better job of working on. I would commend this district for beginning a program to recruit from within young people, help them, those children who see those teachers as their role models, who are excelling in the classroom, to recruit them into a program to say, hey, you can be a great teacher, a great building administrator, and we're going to help you along that path. I think all of us can take a page out of that book and say we all need to do more of that. Because A, right now there aren't as many teachers of color as we would like to have, but B, we need to help make this a more desirable profession overall. And what better place to recruit than the students who are really knocking it out of the park in our own high schools. So you've a difficult decision. This is the most difficult decision that a school board will make. You hold the future of the district, its next generation of leaders in your hands. But you can take solace in the support that was expressed from every segment of the community. And we at Kent ISD appreciated the opportunity to be of assistance to you today and in the future. Because we all know, and I think the wonderful thing about Kent ISD and its 20 school districts is that they all know that as Grand Rapids goes, so too do they. That we all need a strong Grand Rapids Public Schools for the entire region to prosper. So thank you so much for asking us to do this. Thank you so much for taking upon yourself the responsibility and accountability that comes with being a school board member and the work that it takes and the time. I mean, I know you're incredibly well compensated for that. And I hope your compensation is ultimately in the satisfaction you see in a district that's headed in the right direction. A district that, as Joe Jones said, could truly be a model for the nation. The urban district that could. Thank you so much for that.
The question was timeline, and again, to your point, Dr. Baker, I do commend the board for getting an early start on this process and not sitting on your hands. I mean, you were caught in a little bit of a dilemma in the sense of the timing. The good news is that Teresa provided ample notice, but given the fact that you had a board election happening in November and you couldn't go too far down the road until that election happened, you could have just sat on your hands and waited till January. So I commend you for not doing that and getting an early start, because if you've met with MASB, you learned that the very first thing a search consultant would do is exactly what we just did, which is developing the profile and the community engagement process. But I would say, yeah, I think you're in a great spot to move forward once you get to January. You have a tough decision that you have to make when you go to January, if you want to do a search or if you want to just start first looking internal. But if, let's say, you do decide to go with a search process and looking at external candidates, the next step in that process would be hiring the search firm or the search consultant. It could be MASB, but there are other search consultants out there. Michigan Leadership Institute is well known here in Michigan. There's national superintendent search firms that have reputations. Hazard Young Attia is one of them. Ray and Associates, School Exec Connect. I mean, there's a lot of firms out there that do this work. But I would see that it would not be unrealistic at all to have that process completed by the time you get to spring break and be able to extend an offer of employment prior to April 1. And if you can move faster than that without cutting corners, without shortchanging anything, I would encourage you to do that, because obviously the more time that the appointee has to work alongside with Teresa Weatherall-Neal, Superintendent Neal, before she retires, is a good thing. That will assist the transition process. So even if they're from afar, let's say that they're from another state, there will still be the opportunity for collaboration, discussion, et cetera, where that individual could benefit from having some time with her before she retires. So I think realistically, to have this wrapped up by the end of March would be a good thing, and if you can do it before then, that's even better. And I think you're in a position to easily accomplish that.
So with all your timelines, a lot of people use either MASB or MLI. But I've heard, at least in Michigan, if we had an open RFP process for choosing a firm, how long would that take?
It's going to take a little while, probably take a couple weeks for those firms to respond to the RFP. Once it's out there on the street, and then you're going to want to conduct interviews, presumably, where they would come in and pitch and make a presentation about why they're search firm would be a better choice than the next firm that's out there. But, you know, that might take 3 or 4 weeks, or combined, I'm saying, you know, maybe another week or two for them to come in and for you to have a special meeting for that purpose to interview those firms to make a selection. The good news, though, is that the pamphlet, you know, we can go back to our shop right now. We have the characteristics if you supported that, and, you know, in terms of the recruiting material, and you know, we could develop that on our in our shop, or we could work with you to do that. So once the firm is selected, they can go. They can just start to move forward and start to beat the drum and recruit, and then the posting can get out very soon thereafter. Oh, I was just saying the recruiting materials. You know, I mean, this is the stuff that would go in Ed Week, in the publications, or that would be disseminated, be posted on the website, etc. The brochure about the district and the characteristics that you're looking for. So I would think that you could have the search consulting firm hired and be ready to go to have the position posted. The search consulting firm hired by the end of January, and the position posted by the end of January or early February. And if you're looking at a 3 to 4 week posting period, you know, then your interviews would probably be conducted, your first round interviews probably in early March, followed by a second round, put you in the middle of March, and then a finalist a selection, you know, 3rd or 4th week of March. That's just, you know, giving you a snapshot. If you go internal, much quicker, much faster.
Obviously, one of the things to kick this off, I guess, would be a job description to some degree. So you mentioned pamphlet materials. I'm wondering if, I don't know what my colleagues think, but if it would be appropriate to maybe ask you to take a stab at something to get us started in that regard. And of course, we could vet and alter edits or whatever as needed. But I think that would be a key point in getting things forward. We have something that's relatively vague, but we need something more robust.
Absolutely. Yeah, the question was about a job description, and we could definitely help with that. Part of those key characteristics that I was sharing with you that came from the community stakeholder meetings, that we would want to embed and incorporate those key characteristics, you know, within that description. I feel kind of silly with 2 microphones, but I don't know what to do here, so. Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Monica's taking pictures of me with this thing, you know what I mean? So.
That's my Instagram.
Yeah, there you go.
If we hired a firm, what that firm would do?
Yes. I mean, that would be one of the services that a firm could assist with. That's a good point. So.
Another alternative might be too that we engage in a session early in January, and then we flush out based on recommendations what a job description would look like and what a process would look like, and then timetable. I mean, that is in fact our work.
Absolutely. I will say it's a purchase service. So when I talk about an RFP, you know, technically, just so you know, as a purchase service, you don't have to do an RFP. You know, you could just, if you knew a firm and you were impressed by, you know, let's say MASB, they do very good work. There's nothing that says you have to do a request for proposal on superintendent search consulting firms. You can just flat out say this is who we want. I'm just want to make sure you're aware of that.
I guess one of the questions I would have is that, in terms of perception, if a firm is not hired, is the public going to think that that the board is not doing due diligence in terms of looking either for the best candidate or overall senses like that?
I would suggest that you hire a firm, even MASB, even if you have a hybrid process or a streamlined process, to assist you, with some of these steps in meetings and so forth. And here's why. Even if you go internal, I mean, this is just my advice, or I want to stop short of saying it's a recommendation, but even if you decided to go internal and forego a search, if that was your decision in January after weighing all this information, I would still strongly encourage you to conduct an interview or interviews of your internal candidate and treat it as if it were a search. Very publicly, very openly, in terms of putting that candidate or candidates through their paces as far as earning the position. And so to assist you with that, I guess in a long-winded, that's where the search consulting firm can assist you with how to conduct those meetings, how to set those meetings up, what interview questions you'll want to ask of those candidates, or even if it's an internal candidate, how to engage the public in that process, with meet and greet sessions and so forth. That's where a search consulting firm, even if it's streamlined, can be of value to you, even if the decision is we're going to go internal or look internal first before we look outside.
I was going to comment that whether we do internal or
You can speak louder.
whether we do internal or external, specifically if we do internal, I believe that we do need that partnership with a consulting firm. And because of the timeline that we are on, I would like to suggest that we come to the meeting with options of consultants, as well as at the same time looking at the course we'd like to take. If it's in the packet beforehand, everyone can come to the meeting educated and ready to take a vote with our new members alongside us so that we can move forward with the decision. But specifically, if we choose to do an internal process, which I'm not saying that I'm advocating for, but if we do, we need that consulting partner alongside us so that there's a third party walking alongside that process.
No, I agree with Christina because Christian, I'm sorry, I agree with Christian. Probably a lot of others do. I think it would be appropriate for us all to be educated enough by January 7th that we could make the decisions concerning whether we want to do we want to hire somebody? And if we want to hire someone, who's out there that we might hire? And at that point, we might want to look at internal or external. And since our two new board members have been with us all day, I don't know that they are any less informed than we are about this whole process now. So I think it would be a perfect time for us to get going on it rather than let it hang out so long that we're moving way beyond our timelines.
And I would also say perhaps looking at the options for consultants is some work of the ad hoc committee to put that information together so that it can be shared with others. Tony, would you say?
So I think that we need to think through the logistics of doing any of this. So to get something done by January 7th would require some sort of a meeting, either today or between January 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Okay, so that would require, if an ad hoc policy committee met, it would have to do it on one of those 3 days, which is presumably possible. I think that the other thing is, though, is I think that there is a sense that the more we do as a full board, the better. I guess the question is what is, I wouldn't mind, and also if we vote on something on January 7th and it's in the packet, then somebody has to write something for us to vote on, which could be the ad hoc policy committee, Or it could be, or we could actually, I mean, I wouldn't mind, so I guess to some extent, I know we can't necessarily propose something, but I wouldn't mind if people are comfortable with MASB, we could just vote on MASB on January 7th. We could do our own individual research between now and then and see if we would like to vote against MASB on Monday, on the 7th, and suggest exploring other options. I think that we could each have, I mean, we could actually go to the websites of organizations. I mean, my sense is that, again, the RP process is going to take a while, so that loses us a month, especially since we're not meeting until January 7th. If we're all comfortable with MASB doing the work, and that work is going to look the same anyway, then I would be okay with doing that. And then we could just plan on voting on that, and we don't have to have a special ad hoc policy committee. In terms of the second question that keeps floating here is whether or not we do an internal, an external, or an internal external. And you know, that could be something that we have as a discussion on January 7th. And that, again, we kind of go back and discuss the pros and cons of each. So, but I think the other thing is that there's a lot of advice in these documents about what the public would like to see us do. And, you know, we might spend more time thinking about it. You know, anyway, that's all other thoughts, but.
Given that timeline, this is just to facilitate, obviously I won't be involved, but given that scenario, could, and let's say you hired MASB, on the next work session, could there be a very robust discussion facilitated by them on the course of action, whether it's internal, external, because that's a pretty big decision. But it's, I mean, I was just throwing it out there. I'm not trying to deliberate, so.
And we did engage in some of that conversation.
Did you? I wasn't there.
So we did engage in some of that conversation today, enough to be dangerous to make a decision at least that's my perception. Someone may want some more in-depth information about that.
Yeah, I didn't think that we had decided specifically on which direction to go.
No, we didn't decide.
We just began to have some cursory discussion on it. I would propose, recognizing that we have a finance committee meeting before the board session, that we consider perhaps putting in an hour in work session just to discuss, you know, the report. It could be done on the 7th, and then we could make some decisions with respect to which direction to go and begin that process on the 7th. It would mean, you know, in addition to our finance committee at 4. No? I thought we were going to do a special session on that.
At the end of the month.
Okay. Well, then a special session prior to our regularly scheduled board meeting.
Well, I think that these reports inform the organization that we hire to help us make a decision about the process that we do. So I'm hesitant to decide the process before we educate the firm that's going to help us through it. You know, I think that kind of reverses it. You know, I think we should decide on MASB or another search firm. They should dig into the data and then help us make the right decision about how we want to walk through the process of hiring.
Jen, are you suggesting we do that tonight then, that we?
I'm not. I think we should make a decision about MASB or creating an RFP at our board meeting on the 7th with our new board members. And then I think based on that decision, we should use the following work session on Monday the 14th to determine the process for hiring, whether internal, external, or hybrid.
And so you're saying bring the search firm in on the 14th?
Correct.
I don't know if you have to move the mic, but.
I feel like I'm in the way in general.
I mean, I think that if we start with hiring the firm on the 7th and we're not doing the RFP, the 14th is probably a reasonable time to do it. I would like to run through just real quick again, and maybe if you guys don't mind, the pros and cons of So there's a rumor that we have a strong internal candidate, so that's out there, so we might as well just say that. So what are the benefits, pros and cons of doing an external search from the beginning with a strong rumored internal candidate? What are the pros and cons of doing an internal versus external, and then also the community perception stuff? We might as well, I mean, I know that we need to revisit this, but I think that just to have this, everybody's here that's gonna be making a decision, to have this out there for us to be thinking about over break and have people communicate with us, I think would be great.
Yes, and so, again, the benefits of the internal versus external, and I don't know, I think it's page 6 or something like this in the booklet, where I try to get into some of those details based on stakeholder input. But if if you have a strong internal candidate, a viable internal candidate, again, the advantages, obviously, with that is that this individual hits the deck running, is familiar with the initiatives that are underway, is familiar with the landscape, familiar with the relationships, et cetera, that go on with the city, the momentum that Grand Rapids, the positive momentum that you've been on, the journey that you've been on, and presumably could continue those initiatives without missing a beat, still with the thought of bringing on their new ideas, their own stamp of what they would contribute to leadership, their own vision. So, and then with that comes, whether it's an internal or external, is that individual naming his or her own team. And backfilling the position that they vacated, if they're an internal candidate, as well as any other possible openings or restructurings or what have you that could go on within the organization. So the advantage is, again, let's stay on the success path that we're on, and let's keep going. The disadvantage is the concern, is that person really the best candidate? How will we know? Because we didn't do a search, that there may not be someone out there who, as good as that individual is, might even be better. And what they could bring to the organization, et cetera. And the other thought, again, from some, is that, we do need, Grand Rapids could benefit from a fresh perspective. If this individual is from another region of the United States, what's worked within their community, if they move the needle, et cetera, and let's bring some of those ideas to the Grand Rapids Public Schools. So that's the pros and the cons. And is that what you're asking? No. Okay, I'm sorry.
I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, and that's very important, but what I was asking is, what in terms of how we do the search?
Oh, I got you. Yep.
If it's known, if there's a rumor that we have a strong internal candidate, what are the pros and cons to doing an external? So go through that list, you know what I'm saying now?
Yeah, in terms of process. If you go internal, if I'm understanding your question correctly, there have been examples elsewhere in the state of Michigan where the board just says, you're it. Nope, no interviews, no, I mean, it's the board acts and appoints that individual without any type of a vetting or interview or public interview process. And so if I understand, Dr. Baker, what you're asking, I think I would encourage that with an internal candidate that you would want to put that individual through, even if you're before you're at that juncture of saying we want to look outside or not. I mean, if that's an option. Before we look outside, we want to closely examine our internal candidate. I would treat it as if you would treat any final interview for a superintendent, whether they're internal or external. Very public interview, a community engagement process where the community gets a meet and greet, an opportunity to get to know this individual a little bit better, to give the board feedback on what their perceptions are and their concerns, or whether their input into that process. But then you would interview this individual publicly and put them through a bona fide, legitimate We're going to ask the questions, and maybe even a second interview publicly before an offer is extended. I mean, that's on the internal. The external, if you did a blend, you would put this individual in the mix with everyone else.
What's the consequence of that for the external?
From the external?
For the external, yeah, what would the consequence be for the external pool if we did that?
The potential consequence is, will you draw a deep pool of sitting experienced superintendents? If you do that, knowing that there is a very strong internal candidate. Again, because the risk for those superintendents is that this process is very public, according to the Open Meetings Act, as it should. The interviews happen. The candidates, once you decide who you're going to interview, is very public knowledge and information that gets back to their communities. And that can make their life a little bit challenging. Their risk is pretty great. Great reward, great risk. You know, if they want the job, there's great reward if they get the job. But if they go after this job and don't get it, then they've got to go back to their communities and say, hey, I really do want to be here. I was just testing the waters. Or, you know, I was being asked to recruit for, being asked to apply for this position. And convince their community, convince their staff, convince their board that they truly want to be in the district wherever they're currently serving. And that's the risk, is that some of those individuals may assess that situation and say the risk is too great. And so if there's a strong internal viable candidate, they will think that through. And that's why, I mean, I'm not trying to say you don't know until you try. You may get some strong sitting superintendents who say, the heck with that, I'm going after this job. This is an attractive district. There's so many good things going on. I've always wanted to live and work in Grand Rapids, and this is my opportunity, and I'm going for it. I'm not saying that won't happen. But the other side of that equation is that picture that I just painted for you. And so it's not uncommon. And even if you take a look at your past superintendents that have come from outside of Grand Rapids, that you may typically get number twos, deputies, assistant superintendents, et cetera, because they don't have to explain it to their community. They just have to explain it to their boss, which is the superintendent, and if the superintendent is worth their salt, that's part of their job, is to prepare a successor. They're pushing their assistant superintendents to say, go be a superintendent. And so there's not as much risk. Now, that doesn't mean that the assistant superintendents won't be superstars either. That's sort of the profile. Did I answer that?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
You got it. Thanks.
Well, I think, I think this idea of going internal, external blend, I don't like that at all. Because I think, first of all, it might discourage a really qualified internal candidate who does not want to be hung out to dry if he or she puts him or herself out there and then goes through the whole interview process and then is rejected by their district. So my feeling is we either go, maybe we can just start internal, because I think we discussed our policy today that said that we will recruit our own people, and that we do that first, and then we move on to a search committee if we need that. But I also accept the idea that we should have someone holding our hands even if we go with an internal search in MESD or the ISD or whatever.
I think there'd be advantage to having having it the new year for the new members to be able to deliberate in this process. I certainly don't need to be up here. So.
Well, I have just a proposal kind of based on our conversations. Could we, one, I mean, I know this might be something that we'd have to, but I like the idea of you guys doing work instead of us. No, if, I do like the idea of you, even if we hire a firm, it would be, I think it would be great if you guys wouldn't mind putting at least a draft job description together based on these findings and what job descriptions look like. I think that it wouldn't, not that we would necessarily, that we would just have it as a tool sometime between now and January. I'd also like to suggest that we consider, we need somebody to write this up for the packet in January, a consideration of hiring MASB at the January 7th meeting, and then a plan to have the work session on the 14th, where we grapple with our new consultants on all of this stuff that we've been talking about when we have our new board members. So in other words, the three things I'm suggesting is, I mean, we don't necessarily need ISD to do this, but it wouldn't hurt, and it'd be nice. It wouldn't hurt anybody but the people doing the work. And then we'd have that with us to at least inform MASB, or if we hired them to go forward, to put on the packet in January that we would consider voting on hiring MASB, and then 3, the work session, January 14th, would be dedicated to working with MASB about our next steps in the search process. So.
I have a question about your first point. Do we all agree that all of the characteristics listed are all things that we find, I just want to at least ask that, do we agree with the characteristics that have been put forward? Are there additional things that we think are needed, or things that we think are maybe good but not necessary to include in that job description? We haven't had that conversation either before we ask them to move forward on that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Perhaps this could be framed in such a way that says, based on the community profile, this is what a job description would look like for your superintendent.
Yeah.
And then we use that document to then inform with MASB or whomever our search firm is, what the overall document looks like with our own input.
And we've had time to review
Yeah.
and come to the table with
Yeah,
additional.
I agree with
Right,
what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So we wouldn't be beholden to that job description, but it'd be a nice starting place compared to not having anything. So.
Correct, and it takes into account the work that both that they did and that the community gave input to. So,
Sounds like you guys have a plan and it's 4 o'clock.
Is that good? Everybody good with that, right?
Yeah. I've never used this in all my time. I think this meeting's adjourned.